what's the purpose of parks? And Wally talked about it. The purpose of parks is really to provide a public benefit, to allow people to go and recreate, or to recreate and to relax and do whatever people do in parks. And we have a park that has 3 buildings, and I think as long as leaving those buildings unoccupied or unused is not the right thing to do, and I think you're rectifying that tonight. I want to thank you very much.
Any other public comments?
Bob McLean at 260 Prior Lane. Yeah, I was a little dismayed at the bureaucratization of the process, and that was as I listened to some of the comments about the rules. There were things like paying for insurance and segmenting the whole process to a fare thee well. And I think that the points that have just been made, something like the ACIL, I'm not sure we have the money or the Easter egg hunt to pay liability insurance. And then there were issues, we'd like to participate and contribute toward that, but I'm not sure we can go out and get a policy every time we want to have an event. Secondly, to require that townspeople do all the setup and takedown, that's a big cost. But in the past, we've been able to set chair bills up and chairs up and put them away, and to have someone come in afterwards and say you did a lousy job or a great job, and we'll have to charge you to bring a janitor in, I understand. But I think, let's not bureaucratize the whole thing, because I think there are a lot of volunteers in these organizations that can do a lot of that kind of work, and would diminish the cost, make it useful to more organizations. And I guess the last point is, I'm not sure I understand the difference between a bar mitzvah and a wedding and I don't know what the Hindus do, or I'm not sure what the Black Caucus does, or the women's group, these celebratory sorts of events, I think it would be better to regulate size and noise or something of that sort, rather than to get down an alley where you're allowing some group and not another group for reasons I'm not sure we can all defend. So thank you.
Any other public comments?
Denise Kupperman, Atherton Dames. I'd like to actually agree with my fellow resident that to get down to the type of celebratory event that you have is, I think, cutting hairs, and it really becomes a policy issue as to what type of events, or when you have the events and how big they are. And if you look at weekends and you look at sporting events and families using the park, that maybe perhaps that would be times that you do not have a 250 or 150 person wedding, and that it's, if you establish a policy around time and size, and maybe a policy about how many parking spaces that you can have, and that you might have to instruct people to park at the train station, then that might facilitate and sort of ease some of the problems that you have. And then just for the record, I'd like to say that as a long-term Atherton Dames, the Atherton Dames do reimburse the town for any costs associated with our fundraising events, and that we are accumulating money in a fund to do a betterment in the park. And we usually bring our proposals to the Park and Rec, and then eventually to the town council. And that as a foundation member and a Dames member, I do feel that we should probably pay for the direct costs of our meetings. Thank you.
Any other public comments? So we'll bring it back to the council and we can continue. Thank you for your indulgence.
And I think I have
I'll second. Can you have the motion read back?
that we approve parties, gatherings, group activities, fundraisers. Large activities and fundraisers are already under local group meetings, and classes.
As representative types, because
yes, as
Councilmember
yes.
McKeithen was very clear that these and similar activities.
Yeah.
With size restrictions.
No, I think the size, you can't start restricting size.
Well,
a graduation ceremony. I think if it's in the pavilion itself will restrict the size. You can't go beyond a certain number of people for legal occupancy in the pavilion.
I can continue to harp on pricing. And one of the comments here about weekends, there's a demand pricing. The toll roads now will have different prices for different times of the day or week. We can do the same thing in the park. we haven't, as Mike said, we haven't looked at the pricing part of this at all. We've sort of taken what the former park events director said was the market price on these things, and we had to be competitive. Well, we don't have to be competitive to the same extent. We've got something unique. We've got something here that we ought to price accordingly. And if somebody wants to have an event on the weekend, why not charge more on the weekend so that we'll have fewer of those things and you have more, time for Atherton residents to come and so forth. So I would hope that as part of the motion here that we take a look at our pricing model and see if we can't come up with something that's more logical.
I have a problem with the pricing model because I do believe parks are there for public benefits, and I think a lot of these activities serve a public benefit for people who are already paying taxes to support the park. And if they're not paying taxes to support the park, they're paying taxes to support their facilities, which we in Atherton use. So, I mean, there's reciprocity here, with the exception of the two groups that I have not included. And so that's why I think they should be included. There is a benefit. I don't think we need to make money, and we never really have, for example, off the tennis event that occurs there. Very, very little. I think there's a benefit to having those tennis courts used and supplying that service. I think there's a benefit to having yoga or dog training or a graduation ceremony or an art exposition. And I don't think it's necessarily appropriate that we recover all those costs. I think that's part of being a government entity that serves its community. The others, and that's where you and I disagree, the others that's, for me, the straw that breaks the camel's back. They are not serving the community. They are serving a discrete bunch of people who essentially prevent the community from being able to enjoy the facility. And it's that combination that I have problems with.
Well, how do you answer the question about the difference between weddings and other types of
Well, one answer to it is that weddings are basically, have been in the past, all for non-Atherton residents. If you look at the list, I've looked at them before, basically 99% are non-Atherton residents. So therefore, that's certainly one reason. And Jerry, my comment is I agree with you on some of the pricing, but I think we should have the staff, if we decide to pass this resolution, I think we should have the staff look at it and come up with a recommendation on pricing.
Yeah, even with pricing, Jerry, there's been an issue in the past. I mean, I have heard from Jean Cardona, and when we looked at this, when I first became a council member, the prices for weddings were way too low. And I remember calling Jean Cardona, before I became a council member, calling Jean Cardona and asking on what basis they made these costs. And she said they hadn't been reevaluated them in years, and they, as a consequence of my phone call, she started making changes and got it in time for the next season. But even if you have a differential price structure between residents and non-residents, what has happened with weddings, and I've heard this from the entity's mouth, is that you have Atherton residents reserving the facility in their name for a non-Atherton resident. So you have that. It's not to say we shouldn't look at it after the fact. You might want to consider it and look at the options, but I don't think that's the important thing.
I just can't buy your logic on this at all.
I think the important thing is that we allow these events to continue and that they serve a public function.
I really have to take umbrage about the discrimination against non-residents and residents. I think the park was entrusted to us to offer it to the community at large and not specifically to Atherton residents. It's not like Foothill Park with Palo Alto, where if you have a Palo Alto address and driver's license, you get in free, and you have to pay to come in if you are a non-resident, or sometimes you don't even get to come in at all if you're a non-resident. I think that the splitting of hairs about a wedding versus a birthday party or a bar mitzvah or another kind of event is over-exaggerated to make a point. And I honestly believe that our pricing is at the key, not only to cover our costs, but to provide the service, the ability to have the revenue at a managed rate. It doesn't mean that we have to book every weekend a wedding or to the exclusion. It's all about management of it, and to cherry pick and say we're going to do this and we're going to allow that and not the other things. I think that the limitation should be around numbers of guests, impact on the park, and then price it accordingly. I really feel that we're making a big mistake by trying to over select who and what can come and rent the park. The park is for the public and for events.
Excuse me, but I don't have any desire to over-select. I want to say that it should be open to everybody.
Yeah.
Everybody, and that includes the library when we get to it, and having people who are not Atherton residents use it. But all I'm saying is that we shouldn't necessarily have a price.
And this motion doesn't mention residents or non-residents, and I think that's fine.
I think I've said repeatedly, we use their facilities, they should be able to use ours.
Can we have a vote?
Okay.
What are we voting on?
I'm not sure.
We're voting on including, allowing parties, gatherings, group activities, fundraisers, and classes, and this type of activity in the discretion of the Atherton city manager to continue at the park.
And picnics, meetings, retreats, and seminars.
School picnic success. Okay, that's my motion.
It says school picnics?
Yes, it does.
What about family picnics?
She said it, said
She
it.
said
Or similar, it's not an exact list.
Similar activities.
Similar. Theoretically, you could have a small meeting, a small seminar in one of the facilities, paying the fee, as long as it fit within size and wasn't, I mean, the clear, I think the staff has the essence of the motion, and that is basically to
Serve the community.
free it up for community use.
Yes.
That's right.
I'm all for that, but I think it's.
So we have
Can I
the,
call the,
so we have the motion on the table.
I'm going to vote for it. In fact, it's at least moving the right direction, but we're not there yet.
Is it the city manager's discretion to decide whether or not they need an insurance policy?
doesn't our insurance policy cover these sorts of things? No?
No, we're essentially insured through ABAG. ABAG's the one that says they don't want people to set up chairs by themselves because someone will clip off a finger and sue us.
I would say within the discretion of the city manager. Some of these organizations should not be charged for,
You have
it's
one
$1
day-
million and $2 million.
One-day policies, don't you?
Is what
You can get them
APEC.
from ABAC.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think organizations have gotten one-day policies at very small.
But you'll also know whether or not it's needed in that
So,
situation.
okay, so I think we have a motion on the table that covers the events or similar types that they have there. I'd like to we have a second, so I'd like to call a vote.
Can we ask one question, just because we're gonna have to live with this? I know Councilmember McKeithen, who made the motion, at one point in time said that would include recovery of direct costs.
On a cost recovery basis.
And size basis is I also threw in.
Well, size, no, because I think the facilities.
I think you're talking about incremental
Yeah.
variable costs
I'm
associated with
not-
that.
Staff would, when we say direct costs, we're talking about if we set up chairs, and those kinds of things. And the only reason I would say to you that staff recommends this kind of highly is because we're trying to avoid the concept of gift of public funds.
Fine, then yes, it should be
But,
included.
but if it's the ACIL or some other.
Well, they typically do pay.
If there are direct costs, and by the way, these are fairly nominal, to be honest with you. We're not talking about rental fees, we're talking about costs, because rental fees, I think it's what Councilmember Carlson is talking about, you can set those any place you want. These are just fixed costs.
Yes.
or variable costs for each.
And I
for
did
each.
say that, and yes, that can be included.
So
Okay.
we have a motion, we've got a clarity, and we've got a second. Are we ready to vote?
We have
Yeah.
one
Can I
more.
ask one, just clear? So my understanding is that of these categories, the two that are not included is weddings
And
and corporate events. Is that-
non-designated, non-community events.
Yeah, non-town designated community organization events.
Yes,
Is not included.
correct.
Not included.
Thank you.
Okay.
Mhm.
All right.
Okay.
So can we have the vote on this so we can, I'd like to add one amendment that we open the park up immediately, so there are some things that are pending.
Yes.
Where there's calls in.
Well, that's
Okay.
in there right now.
Not pending a revision of
No, 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 this is
the
a no.
fee structure, okay.
Yep.
All right. So all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much.
Yay.
All right. Next item is 25, and we've got, thank everybody for turning in their meeting notes. There are two council members that still owe us.
I'm not gonna do it. Ever since my report was totally edited and then taken out by a former city manager on a couple of occasions, I refused. I'm not gonna have my reports edited.
You might want to try it. Okay, all right.
I tried.
And I know Jim is about to do a report. You're gonna do a council report? No. I'm not. Okay, fine. Well, thank the three of us who turned in. I appreciate it and I enjoyed reading them. Thank you very much. Any comments or questions on any of the council member reports, including the one that was emailed out today from Elizabeth? Okay. Future agenda items.
I just wanted to say, in order to avoid any miscommunication in the future, what we'll do is have staff send that staff report to the two people who created the colleagues note.
I think that's a great idea.
We can do that.
No.
I think that's a good idea. Thank you. Any other future agenda items? Okay, seeing none, any final public comments?
Yes, we talked about how we're not gonna be looking at special funds, but I would like there to be consideration of a budget for the library. I think that this is being responsible. I would like to know what the staff budget is going to be for the library fund. How much it's going to be, what it entails, because we are stewards of those library funds on the steering committee, and I do not want people asking us why there are these expenses that we don't see and have no oversight over. I want the committee to understand that what's going to be included, what the costs are going to be, what the rate is going to be, and have it approved by council. This is not something the steering committee wants to become involved in.
If I could comment, the council has approved a budget for the library fund. That includes the ongoing maintenance, as it always has been for the library, and it does include currently the design work that's going on. In your next year's budget, we are going to create a separate capital library fund. So it'll be very clear that the maintenance part is separate from the design and possible construction of the
But we
new
need a
library.
staff budget for what it's costing to have staff involved in the library, because for a while there it was getting very high and we couldn't tell what it was, and even in response to a question raised by a resident, a $3,000 to $5,000 figure was raised just for review of projects proposals that had been submitted. The library steering committee wants to make sure that the council and the public understand what those funds are going for, and not just as sort of a general item with regard to it, but what staff time is going to cost, since we do have staff liaison.
There was supposed to be quarterly reports going to the library director. I don't know if they're going up there for them to question and challenge any charges that are there. So that was decided and agreed in a finance committee meeting last year before Louise left.
Well, it's not happening.
So that needs to start happening immediately, because that was
Mr. Mayor,
we can't discuss.
we sort of trample on the Brown Act when we go beyond items that are on the agenda, but I would like to recommend amending one of the topics that you have on your agenda every time that will, I think, alleviate that concern. And that is, you have right now council reports. I would like to change that slightly to council reports and comments, so that if anybody has a comment on something that to make to staff or the public or whatever, it gives you as a council member an opportunity, a forum essentially, to share your common thought. And it doesn't have to be something on a future agenda, as that wasn't. But without that, I mean, I just took that as a future agenda item, sort of.
That's what I want.
And so, yeah, even though the mayor had already gone on to public comments. Because council members can't make public comments as a rule. So, because of that, if we add that one item, then it gives you something here, and the public knows that if they want to hear what you're thinking, they can listen, and there's a spot for you to say something.
Then I would recommend we consider moving it to the front of the meeting.
But where you want, sir?
Okay?
I'm fine where it is, but comments, at least as an initial step, is a good thing to do.
I would just add, if we're not allowed to, one comment is that I think that the staff, if they're spending time on various items of the budget, need to identify much more clearly exactly what they're doing and what they're charging. That's all I would say. I've seen sort of generalized numbers in there that I know. I mean, really, somebody's looked at what they've done last week and they said, well, I'll charge this fund or this fund. I don't think that's the right way to go.
Okay. So anyway, any other public comments? Okay, we have a motion to adjourn? So moved. All in favor, aye. Thank you very much. Thank you for sitting here for the whole time. Thank you for watching on YouTube.
Acclamation. Approved by acclamation.